Yeah, what's cracking like it, baby? Welcome to episode 2 of We Just Named the Show called The Championship Rounds with a collab of Hot Sauce Sports, Beyond the Fighting, Unanimous Decision. A pleasure to be hosting this week. Last week we had Adam host. We did the top 10 middleweights of all time. This week we're doing the welterweights of all time. I'm joined by, from Beyond the Fight, we got Andy. Andy, how's it going, buddy?
Awesome. Really excited to do this. I really enjoyed the middleweights, and now I'm ready to cause some controversy with my welterweight list.
That's a little bit of controversy. Not as much as you would think, but yeah. And we also got from Unanimous Decision the voice between your ears, the voice in your ears, Adam Caplan. How's it going, buddy?
Yeah. Surprise, surprise. The king is back, motherfuckers.
Nobody has a better intro, though, for your show. I think it's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, your intro's sick. So we're getting into the welterweights this week. All three of us gave in our picks, our top 10. I think we have had a few that we're all consensus with. There's a couple that one guy had. There's a couple that only two guys had. So it's pretty interesting as it gets down to the between about 6 and 10. So we'll start at the top just to get out of the way. I think we're all unanimous on this one. We have him number 1. He's Adam's favorite fighter. He's considered the GOAT. He's considered the best of all time. From Saint Isidore, Quebec, George Rush St. Pierre. Can't get any. I don't think we can get any debate on that.
No, guaranteed. That is a unanimous decision right there, baby. George St. Pierre. You can't not go with George. I mean, the come up, the story, the title reign, given the fighters that he fought, the consistency he fought at was insane. And even to take that time off after a tough matchup in Johnny Hendricks and then to come back and win that middleweight championship against Michael Bisping, some would say that he swooped in at the perfect time. I would say so too. If anybody has ever watched boxing, they would definitely know that a lot of fighters have swooped in at the right time to fight lower caliber champions. So that to me doesn't take anything away from GSP. And to be honest with you, I was ready to put him on as an honorable mention on our first show for the middleweights.
Yeah, it's true.
I agree. I definitely think GSP has done everything for the sport. You know, he helped elevate it for Canada back in 2004 when he made his debut. And when he came on, he was known as a striker. He did Kyokushin karate. He's got a cult following for that in the Kyokushin karate scene in Quebec and Canada. If you talk to everyone in Quebec that does Kyokushin, yeah, I did it because of George St. Pierre. GSP did it. But then we have to realize George became not just a striker, but one of the best well-rounded grapplers. After his loss to Max Serra, had that renaissance where he took the short notice fight at UFC 79 versus Hughes for the trilogy and displayed extremely high-level grappling, beating Hughes at his own game. And then not only that, erasing the L on the record by fighting Serra for the rematch and just showing that it really was just a fluke, that UFC 69 knockout loss, and then going on with the consistency of beating like a murderer's row of welterweight. Some fights were, you know, a bit like the Jake Shields or the Dan Hardy, but it can't be denied that George was like levels above, especially the comeback fight versus Condit on November 17th of 2012 to basically, what's the word I'm looking for? It was the interim, like there was to unite, or the interim and
unify the belts.
Unify. I didn't have the word there. Fuck me.
The unification.
Yeah, the unification of the belts. And after that, you know, George basically solidified himself. He would have liked to probably leave after the Diaz fight, but you know how the fight game is. They pull you back in for one more just when you think you're done. The legacy remains intact. Created such a good legacy for Canadian MMA and MMA as a whole. He's like a global phenomenon. Like now you have guys in Russia that know who he is.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I definitely think that George St. Pierre is the consensus #1 of the greatest welterweights of all time.
So he, to me, he has to be, and I think that if we look, you have to look at moments, and like you guys said at the beginning, you know, maybe he's fighting guys at the end of their careers, whatever. But if you got to look at the moments where GSP kind of became great, and you realize that this guy wasn't fucking around anymore. When he lost to Matt Serra, he changed everything. He changed everything. He became the best wrestler in MMA. To this day, I still think he's the best wrestler in MMA. He also became an extremely good boxer, where before he had more of a karate stance. He was throwing those kicks. He was still a decent boxer, but he really put a lot of work into his boxing. Started training with Freddie Roach. He started doing the right things, and then he became this well-rounded fighter. And the two fights to me that showed me why he's probably the best of all time was Koscheck and Jake Shields. The reason why is when he destroyed those two guys the same way. Jab, 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 takedown. Jab, 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 takedown. And those are two D1 wrestlers that couldn't do anything. Jake Shields, off his back, probably one of the best at the time in jiu-jitsu. Koscheck was no slouch, a decent boxer, but he just got out-wrestled, out-boxed, out-everything. And GSP looked, even though it was a boring fight, GSP looked unbelievable. And those are the types of fights that really stamp your legacy when you look at his career in depth. You can look at his fights against Matt Hughes, BJ Penn, Diaz, Condit, Hendricks. You can look at all those fights and they're great. But reality is that you really saw who he can be when he destroyed Jake Shields and Koscheck for 5 rounds.
Yeah, I mean, George St. Pierre is a through and through mixed martial artist and a martial artist. I mean, you look at all of his strongest skill sets. He's got a strong jab, a strong double leg takedown. He has strong control on the ground. And not only that, he's able to move in and out of range without really getting hit. So he's basically mastered all of the best things that a mixed martial artist could look at. And then you basically see how he's been able to carry that through his career. Are you willing to say, Terry, that those are your 2 favorite fights from George St. Pierre? Because that is something that we do like to say.
No, those aren't my 2 favorite fights from George St. Pierre. My favorite fight from George St. Pierre, I mean, I put Koscheck up there because I remember watching it in my friend's basement, and it was like...
Was it the first one or the second one?
He only fought Koscheck once, did he?
No, twice. He fought him in Montreal.
So it was I think it was the one where he broke his eye.
Yeah, it was in Montreal. It was the pay-per-view.
I think that one for me was a good one, or his fight against Bisping. I think that's a huge one for me because I love that fight because I love Bisping. I love GSP, and to watch GSP win another belt was great to me. You know, that's the fight I like.
For me, I would have to say my 2 favorite GSP fights are UFC 94 versus Penn 2 because that was like the first of the super fights that we kept seeing in 2018 and 2019, where you had a guy in BJ Penn who won the welterweight, which we'll get into on your side, Terry, later on. But yeah, George, and it was basically a chance to like really see like how good were like the best of the best in 155 and 170. And I also liked Thiago Alves because Thiago too was a killer back in 2007.
Fuck, I forgot about Thiago Alves' fight. That was a great fight.
Yeah.
Very good fight.
And Thiago basically said, "Yeah, I'm gonna look for the knockout." And George basically said, "He can't go in thinking this is a kickboxing match. This is an MMA match." And when you watch Thiago fight George, it was like Thiago was playing checkers, George was playing chess, and on that pivotal ceremonial UFC 100. And it's here's a fun fact: only time GSP was ever a co-main event in his career as champion.
Wow, that is a good fucking feat because I never thought of that George didn't fight in a main event thing. Another fun fact is that Thiago Alves was the fighter of the year that year, and George St. Pierre controlled that bout with a torn adductor. He had torn his adductor early on in that fight and was still able to bring Thiago Alves down and nullify his game. So that was mad impressive. For me, I'm going to definitely have to go with one of them being the Bisping fight, just because also we saw a recent finish in George St. Pierre, something that we longed for since beating Matt Serra, since beating Matt Hughes by armbar. On second, I would say that my second favorite one would have to be beating Matt Serra again in the redemption fight, and then the third one being Matt Hughes by armbar. All of the other ones in between by decision were fantastic fights. I think that as more of a hardcore fan, I can look back now and rewatch those and probably appreciate them far more than I did in the moment, because it is tough to stay up for those championship rounds and watch George dominate for, 5 fucking rounds total and not necessarily do everything so in such an exciting manner, but more in a technical manner. But at the end of the day, I got to go with George and Bisping, and then I got to go with George and Sarah to win back the belt, and George and Matt Hughes, man.
I say the Sarah fight was important. The Sarah fight was in the home ground, was in home territory. First one in Quebec, Canada for the UFC, and just showed you how passionate Quebec is and Canada is behind their hero.
So, one fight we didn't mention, actually, I'll glance over it, is Dan Hardy's fight, because we saw him almost finish him in like 4 different ways. He had that arm bar, he had the Kimura, you know what I mean? So like you saw like George St. Pierre, how good he was, how well rounded he was, and Dan Hardy was on a real up and coming at that point. He was like, everybody's like, oh, this guy's like legit, a big deal, whatever. And he was able to just like show everybody that like this guy's not even in my fucking level. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and after the fight, when George St. Pierre wasn't able to finish by armbar, he went into the back with John Danaher, and they actually went over the motion like half a dozen times so that George could, really get that armbar down, because he was completely and totally frustrated by it.
It's because he let Dan Hardy basically go sideways. He didn't have his hips, that is basically ass touching the back of his armpit. So he had that space. So Dan Hardy was just kind of like leaning there, and his arm was just chilling here, but like it wasn't bending enough. Anyway, we'll do technical fights another time on championship rounds. So number 2 of all time, consensus, all 3 of us had him number 2, is Matt Hughes. We gotta love Matt Hughes. Andy, I'll kick it to you first. You start.
Yeah, Matt Hughes is definitely has to be on number 2 because when he came into the welterweight division, this was when the UFC under the Zuffa banner was just restructuring. Came in right after the 9/11 and the infamous UFC 33 show. Matt Hughes gave the welterweight a new meaning of what it means to have that wrestling with the submissions. Not only that, he fought the first Canadian welterweight champion, Carlos Newton, and not many people realize. So before we think GSP was the first Canadian, there was actually Carlos Newton, but it didn't last because Matt was a prodigy under Pat Miletich. Yeah. And basically, he was like the leader of the Miletich the Miletich squad, where he was going and dominated guys such as Frank Trigg. He dominated guys such as
Enzo Gracie.
Hughes was like among the elite of the elite. Like, you can't say you have a welterweight division if you don't have Matt Hughes in your top 2.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, look, Matt Hughes has gone on to beat guys like George St. Pierre, like you said, Frank Trigg, fucking, Hoist Gracie twice, Chris Lytle. He's got a wealth of a resume. I mean, he's one of the guys that I truly think really showed what real wrestling is in MMA and in the UFC. I don't think that Tito Ortiz was able to display the wrestling that Matt Hughes was, especially in that Frank Trigg fight where he brings him across the cage and whatever it is. So, Matt Hughes really brought that next level wrestling into the octagon in his era, and was really able to build the biggest matchups, and being able to defend the title 7 times, on 2 different reigns. It's pretty fucking impressive, man, and it's something that we're not necessarily going to see too often, and the only guy who was really able to precede him on that was GSP.
Matt Hughes' wrestling was it was the first of its kind of thing, where we saw wrestlers, but they were just very good. They were decent boxers, so they would always stand up. It's the same thing with Gaethje. It's like you learn something new, you want to use your toy. You know what I mean? So exactly. That's what you saw with like Randy Couture and Hendo and these guys, these pure wrestlers back then. We can even talk about Miletich, but like Matt Hughes is one of the first guys to really use his wrestling, and he used it, like you said, that Frank Trigg when he picked him up and he dragged him to his corner. You know what I mean? Like Matt Hughes is on a different level back then, and I think he kind of showed everybody that wrestling is a huge piece of this, and if you're not gonna wrestle, you're gonna sink with the sharks, and that's what Matt Hughes did.
100%. Another thing too that we left out is that Matt Hughes has had rematches with not only Hoist Gracie, not only Frank Trigg, not only George St. Pierre, but fucking BJ Penn.
BJ Penn as well, yeah.
He also fought Thiago Alves. So, you know, Matt Hughes, even at the end of his career, was fighting dogs.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, Matt Hughes was always a guy to fight too. He's not a guy to like be like call out, oh, I'm gonna wait for the next one, whatever it is, like it is nowadays. He was always ready to fight whoever it is, and it's such a being at the top for so long. There's always a target on your back, and Matt Hughes always answered the bell.
Yeah, one thing I'll never forget about Matt Hughes is that Army of One T-shirt he always wore.
Yeah,
he was a very big born again Christian, but like. It was like that was like one of the things too. If you knew Matt Hughes was fighting, it's like, oh shit. It's like in your head, if you're his opponent, you're like, what kind of fucking submission is he gonna use on me now today?
Yeah. So Matt Hughes consensus number 2. So right now we had a tie for 3 and 4.
Hold on now. What was your favorite Matt Hughes fight?
Oh my favorite Matt Hughes fight. Fuck, that's a good question. I'm gonna have to say BJ Penn 2.
Him getting knocked out?
No, so 1 then, with the one he won.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Because that's the one I chose is BJ Penn 1.
For me,
my favorite BJ Penn fight is the one he knocked him out of.
Yeah, for me, it would have to be the second Frank Trigg fight, because this is when like Matt really had the new welterweight division prospects coming on him, and he even said he's like GSP and Mayhem Miller at the time and Trigg are the few guys of the future of the welterweight division.
Yeah.
And I know they're coming for me.
And I also think in the second fight is when Frank Trigg low-blowed Hughes, and he almost finished him, and then Hughes, I think, battled back, or maybe that was in the first fight. I'm not sure, but one of those fights, Frank Trigg low-blowed him and almost finished Hughes, and then Hughes just came back to batter.
You're right. It's fuck, that's true. I remember seeing that on a documentary on YouTube recently.
Yeah, bro, that's one of the sickest Hughes fights also.
Yeah.
So and another thing that I'm actually going to have to go with is George St. Pierre versus Hughes 1, where Hughes wins by armbar. Because listen, man, as a George St. Pierre fan and you're watching that fight, like as much as he broke your heart, you really have to think like, God damn, is the champ solid?
Yeah, big time. I mean, the fact that he was able to finish GSP back then. You know, GSP was on such a tear, but GSP was also
by an armbar.
Exactly, yeah. But GSP was also very young at that point, right? I think he never felt that kind of pressure by a wrestler like that. He was still wearing his board shorts. He hadn't switched to the tighty whities yet. You know, so
I think he was also lost in the sauce because he was fighting a guy in Matt Hughes, and obviously, you know, George St. Pierre was slowly becoming that wrestler, slowly becoming to have that wrestler mentality, and I think that really was the last thing that push that through.
Yeah, George was still like just becoming a purple belt in that first Hughes fight, and he was still in his Kyokushin roots. That's like if you watch like the early GSP, it's like that karate stance through and through.
Yeah. So let's go to 3 and 4 here. Like I said, there's a tie. The reason why I have this guy at third is because Adam and I had him ranked number 4. Andy, you had him ranked at 6th. Is Nick Diaz. So Nick Diaz is number 3 on our list. And
wow,
I love Nick Diaz, man. I'm a huge Nick Diaz guy. I think that legends, the two guys, the 3 and 4 are both legends. So Nick Diaz to me, watching what he used to do in Pride. I mean, I just recently binge watched like 5 of his Pride fights. What he did in Strikeforce. Then he coming to the UFC, never really winning the belt, but getting close. Always being polarizing. I mean, game will fight anybody. A soundbite away from laughing your ass off, and a soundbite away from realizing that this guy would take the head off of anybody he sees in front of him. I'm a huge Nick Diaz fan and Nate Diaz fan.
Dude, Nick Diaz is the fucking shit. I mean, look, I believe I put Lawler on my list as number 3, but I will absolutely settle due to the math on Nick Diaz. Look, Nick Diaz is one of those guys that when you were watching MMA, you're looking at him and you're like, holy shit, that's a fighter. And that was a guy that a lot of kids in the schoolyard couldn't imitate and couldn't replicate. Guys like Matt Hughes and guys like George St. Pierre, we've seen guys like that in the gym. We've seen the professionals. We've seen the hard workers. We've seen the blue-collar workers. We never seen a true fucking gangster in Nick Diaz time and time again in the gym and things like that. That stuff does not come often. Nick Diaz has top-class boxing. Him and his brother have helped Andre Ward, have helped other world-class boxers, and not only that, fucking world-class jiu-jitsu as well.
Oh, yeah,
so,
big time.
You know, and the last thing is that without even trying, Nick and his brother have become the most popular guys in interviews and on the mic just due to the fact that they have a personality to them that people can't quite understand unless they articulate.
That's a very good point.
I would have to agree with you guys. Yeah, so I put Nick on number 6 on my list, and being why there were like champions before him. However, it can't be denied the Strikeforce run that he had is legendary. Fought guys like Pitbull, fought Paul Daly, who like almost beat him. Like Paul Daly almost like made all Nick Diaz fans like stand on their feet, worried that he was gonna get him. But Nick had like that granite chin, like he could just take hits, and he comes at you like a zombie. And what the one thing that stood out the most about Nick is he trash talked you, like especially that Robbie Lawler fight where like they're both early in their careers, and Nick was like just going like, "What are you gonna do, motherfucker? What are you gonna do?" He's like Stockton, motherfucker. And it just like slaps him, and like a bitch said, "What? He's like, you gonna get me? You gonna get me? I'm gonna hit you like a fucking bee, man." Just going at him, and it's like that's the thing with Nick. It's like you love it, and then he goes up in Strikeforce when he won his fights. He go up to the cage, and there's like a gif where he goes up to the cage and he goes, "Fuck you, bitch!" Like,
fuck you, bitch. What fight was that for?
Probably the brawl that happened in Nashville on CBS, if you remember, with Jake Shields and Mayhem Miller.
Jake Shields, yeah. I remember
That's interesting, man. You also can't forget the one with Marua Zaromskis. That was a fucking good fight in Strikeforce as well.
I don't know.
But that Paul Daly fight definitely is Nick Diaz in a nutshell. Just goes to show you how fearless he is. I mean, name me one guy that stands toe-to-toe with Paul Daly and doesn't end up on their fucking face.
For me, the biggest Nate Diaz fight was the Gomi fight.
Yeah.
The Gomi
man. Absolutely.
Was unbelievable.
For sure. Well, a little bit of context. The Gomi fight was huge because, Pride was making their way over to Vegas or Los Angeles, I believe, one of the two. And, they were doing a little bit of an America versus Japan thing, and they brought Nick Diaz on. And one of the cool parts about it is that, it was a little bit of an even match because you know how Nick Diaz and style is. Sometimes he gets caught with big shots and especially those looping overhands. And Gomi was winging them. And in that later round, the fight ended up, Nick Diaz ended up on the bottom and ended up getting an omoplata or a go-go platter.
Go-go platter, yeah.
He ended up getting a go-go platter and the coolest part about the whole fight is the post-fight drug test when they said that his THC levels were so high that he virtually must have been stoned during the fight.
That's fucking unbelievable.
Yeah, which was unbelievable. And then he was doing a post-fight interview breaking down the fight and what he thought, and he was surprised on how many times he had gotten hit by Gomi. But that's one of the things that we appreciated Nick Diaz, that we always were so fearful in a guy like George St. Pierre. God forbid we saw Georgie get hit, we would cringe. Oh, yeah. But you see Nick take shots time and time again. He's eating them like fucking like Subway sandwiches. So it wasn't really that big of a deal. But for me, the most polarizing part about Nick Diaz was the fact that he was able to put on a pace for 5 rounds and never fell in love with his power and always was able to stick to a consistent game plan. And I think that as much as people say that he's mentally unstable, bro, his fighting style is quite calculated, actually.
He has power in bunches, basically. So him and his brother, they throw a bunch of punches at 75%, and one of them is going to catch you, and if he doesn't catch you, it's going to knock you down, and then on the ground, you're fucked because you're fighting a Diaz on the ground, and that's basically where he made the money. Yeah, exactly. So Andy, what was your favorite Nick Diaz fight? Did you say it?
Yeah, I have a few, man. First one has to be the Robbie Lawler fight, just for his trash talk, like when you can read the lips, and then the other one probably have to be when he like the shit that happened in Nashville. Like he didn't fight, but I mean, like him and Mayhem went at it because apparently Mayhem had a scuffle with Jake Shields, if I'm not mistaken. That whole 2010 thing, and Nick Diaz is a character to say the least. I just wish we got the GSP fight earlier, back in 2011. If George didn't tear his meniscus, or if Nick showed up to the press conference, because I think in 2011 was the perfect time. And that's the thing with MMA. You get these fights too late, basically.
You get them too late, and some guys, they it's like they want the fight, but it might not be what's good for their career at that moment. So that, we never actually see it. And, sometimes it's too unfortunate. And I think Nick Diaz, against GSP was a tough fight for him because, some people had given it to Diaz. I had given it to GSP. The whole thing, with the press and how he didn't show up. And, Nick Diaz, they're kind of their own worst enemy, those two, you know, where they kind of ruined their own image in front of people, but people started to like it. People were like, yeah, these are who they are. Like, they're not going to be anybody else, you know, they're going to be themselves. That's why I'm a huge Nick Diaz fan. I'd put him number 1 just because I love the guy so much. So at number 4, we had another legend.
One sec now. I just want to tell you my favorite Nick Diaz fight.
We can't see you, Adam. Are you still on?
Yeah, I'll be here.
So I'm gonna have to block it out.
That's funny. So my favorite Nick Diaz fight has to be the one against BJ Penn, and the reason that being is that was when he just came off that binge at Strikeforce. You know, when he went on that crazy winning streak. Mm-hmm. So the reason that being is that for newer fans in the 2010 era, they were like, who the hell is this guy? He's in front of the mic. Where are you at, George? George is a bitch. He's scared, blah, blah, blah. Then, yes, as Andy pointed out, he fought Carlos Condit, which I believe he won. Nick Diaz won that fight against Carlos Condit. I don't believe that fight too. Nick Diaz won against George St. Pierre, but he absolutely won against Carlos Condit, I believe. But for me, it had to be that BJ Penn fight because everybody knew Nick Diaz. But if you were a new age fan in the 2010 era, you weren't really sure who Nick Diaz was, and he exploded on the scene with his character. And to some guys who have no idea who Nick Diaz is, to see him as this polarizing figure and then beating up a legend in BJ Penn, people are like dropping at the jaw to see this guy fight. I actually don't mind when the George St. Pierre fight happened. What I actually mind is that he ended up only fucking fighting in 2015 against Anderson Silva after. Yeah. I know there was some suspension issues, but listen, had he greased the grooves a bit better, he could have been in the octagon sooner.
Yeah, but he's kind of like one of those things where it's like, it's just weed. I'm not going to fucking bow down to anybody and say that I'm guilty. Like, I just fucking got high one time and I got fucking caught. Well, one time. The guy's probably stoned all the time. But Nick Diaz, too, is another thing with him is that he's kind of like that. There's like that respect little bro kind of thing because he came from Pride, where all those legends came from Pride too. So it was like, it's like, oh fuck, Nick Diaz is in Pride. Like, a lot of people say that Nick Diaz is in Pride. Like, you had no idea what kind of a legend he was and what a veteran he is. You know what I mean? People nowadays, they see Nick Diaz, they think he's Nate Diaz's brother. You know what I mean? Nowadays,
which is fucking crazy. It's crazy, think.
Yeah, because Nick Diaz is like fucking. He's the best, man. Yeah, I can't get over how good that guy was. One of the best pure boxers in the in MMA for sure. So on to number 4. 19 points, just like Nick Diaz. I had him ranked 5th. Andy had him ranked 4th. Adam had him ranked 5th, and it's Pat Miletich. So I'll start with you, Adam.
Actually, you know what? I'm going to have to toss this over to Andy, and the reason that being is that Andy actually has a little bit of a relationship with Pat Miletich.
Oh, okay. There
so I want you to set the scene for me, baby.
Yeah, this is a good one. So when you think of welterweight division, yeah, we have Matt Hughes, GSP. Pat Miletich is the inaugural welterweight champion back in the day when SEG was running the UFC. And it wasn't necessarily what he did in the ring. Yeah, he won and defended the title multiple times until he lost to Carlos Condit in 2001. But Pat Miletich was the first of the gym owners that made a real MMA gym in Miletich Fighting Systems. This was a gym. If Faraz Zahabi, Dan Lambert or Bob Cook want to thank anyone for the gyms they have today, it has to go to Pat Miletich, because Pat was the one that had that training back in the day. He had guys that were huge. His twin brother at one point fought Robbie Lawler, Tim Sylvia, and that's because of Pat's accomplishments. When I spoke to Pat, Pat told me like what he put into that. And when we talk, he has so many stories. The guy's like a storyteller. You could ask him about how Robbie Lawler came to his gym. He'll tell you in detail like how Robbie was like a misfit that didn't listen to his dad and how he needed some discipline. And Pat was the one that could get into Robbie's head to get him to behave. And it's just, this guy is just such a good guy, you know. He's done a lot of good things for MMA, and he's kind of a lone wolf where he stays on the sideline with his views and whatnot. But he's in the Hall of Fame for a reason at the UFC. This guy has proven that what it means to own an MMA gym, and also what it means to build a division when he's the inaugural champion, which is no easy feat. Which is why I have him at number 3 on my list.
You had him at number 4.
I stand corrected. Number 4.
Yeah, you had somebody else at number 3. We'll get to him later. So for me, Pat Miletich, he represents kind of like that old guard where it's like you always need these guys that kind of showed everybody the long way. And if you look at, I mean, I can always look back to in football and hockey. In football, Bill Belichick, he has coaches under him, you know, and then they branch out, they become great coaches, and they have guys under them. So he's kind of created this umbrella, and that's what Pat Miletich did. Pat Miletich created that umbrella. Remember when IFL and he fought Henzo, he lost, whatever it is, but he see all these guys, they came under him. You know what I mean? And he created that, like you said, the Miletich fighting system, and he created that first like team atmosphere. And then you saw other ones come out like Extreme Couture and whatever, you know, all these other gyms coming out after that. But it was never really a team. It was always like, oh, we're gonna go to IFL. I'm gonna bring this guy because he got his black belt from a guy that I know, whatever. And it's like that's what it was. But Pat Miletich created like a team environment, you know, kind of like a wrestling team. You know, like the wrestlers together, man, they travel together, they cut weight together, they do everything together, and he created that for the first time. Well, probably maybe not the first time, but one of the best ones at the time. And I think that's why he revolutionized the sport, and that's why I have him so high. Not only that, but he was the inaugural champion. All the legendary fights that he had against Shoney Carter. I mean, you can name a bunch of them. Pat Miletich is the legend.
That's for sure. The reason why I have him on the list, it has nothing to do with his actual fighting career, and it actually has to do with what he's done in the sport. The reason why I have him in the rankings is that he is the inaugural champion, and he was an active fighter. Had Faraz, had Robert Follis, had any of these other OGs been in the UFC, I'd probably have them in my top 10 rankings also. Listen, Pat Miletich has been able to help raise guys like Robbie Lawler, like Matt Hughes, and like all the other animals that you guys named before. And like you said, Terry, gyms like Extreme Couture, you know, maybe even Tito Ortiz's camp, maybe even Chuck Liddell's camp.
What are they called? Team Punishment?
Team Punishment, exactly. Or maybe even Lions Den, even John Hackelman's team with Chuck Liddell and Glover Teixeira. Maybe that doesn't flourish as much if it doesn't have to do with the success of Miletich. So I definitely got Pat on this list for a reason. He's done a tremendous amount for the fucking sport, and I actually think he's going to be the only guy out of all of the weight classes that will actually elect due to what he's done for the sport and out of the octagon versus his actual performances in the octagon.
It's true, and for any of you young ones that have no idea who Pat Miletich is, put some fucking respect on his name. The guy's a fucking legend. You know what I mean? And it's if you don't know who Pat Miletich is, just Google him and watch and look and read up on all the influence he's had in the UFC and in MMA in general. The wars that he's gone through. He's just an ultimate champ, and I'm a big Miletich fan.
Absolutely. I didn't even prepare myself for the Miletich segment because I knew that at least Andy would have it in the bag due to his experience with him. I just knew through and through that I was having Miletich on the list due to the fact of all of the fucking guys that he's actually brought into the game because of what he's done for the sport.
Yeah, definitely one of the nicest guys ever. If anyone ever has a chance to message him on social media or get in touch with him, super nice guy. We'll give you the time of day. Knows MMA inside out. Like, he's gonna school you if you try to get smart with him. And he's got his views, and whether you like them or not, like on fighting, but can't be denied that he still has it. Like, he's still very sharp, even though he does more work with LFA and other smaller promotions. So he's doing it. He's doing his mark to help bring up the amateurs into the pro ranks.
He's a purist, man. He's a purist, and we need guys like that. Not everybody can be like a world class gym, or can have world class fighters like Jackson Wink or whatever. We need guys like Miletich that keeps everybody grounded. He's like the older brother that you don't fuck with. So that's number 4. Number 5, this guy had 16 points. I had him number 7. Andy had him at number 7, and Adam had him at number 3. It's our boy Robbie Lawler. So Adam, since you had him ranked that high, I'll let you go first.
Listen, I got to go with Robbie Lawler due to the success of his career. I mean, look, we were talking about Nick Diaz before in terms of how exciting it was, how he was in the UFC. Then he had that long hiatus in Strikeforce, and then he came back into the UFC. Except didn't get all the work done quite, okay? Didn't win against Carlos Condit. Didn't win against George St. Pierre. Didn't win against Anderson Silva. Had a lot of tough losses. Robbie Lawler came back and fucking lit the UFC on fire. He had 2 fight of the years with Johnny Hendricks. He had a fight of the year with Rory McDonald. He had another close matchup with Rory McDonald. He had a fucking he had a tough matchup with with Tyron Woodley as well, which kind of sucked to see. And ultimately, Matt Brown as well. Like, dude, Robbie Lawler has fought every single guy in the UFC and has had fight of the year fights with these guys as well. So for me, the reason why I had him third on the list is just due to the fact that not only was he able to get his second chance in the UFC, but he fucking took that shit and ran with it much further than Nick Diaz did, in my opinion. That's why I had Robbie Lawler ranked higher. And, if you look at the boxing of Robbie Lawler, if you look at the takedown defense, if you look at the pure grit, and you look at the absolute you just look at the absolute intensity in Robbie Lawler's face in the Rory McDonald fight, dude, he's absolutely he's a fucking terror.
Yeah, I definitely would. I would have Lawler higher on my list too. He was actually the fighter that got me into MMA. It wasn't Conor McGregor. It was actually Robbie Lawler with that fight versus Rory, the second one. But Robbie is a very interesting cat, because this was a guy that started 4-0 in the UFC. He was seen as like the Mike Tyson of welterweights, coming out of, ironically, Miletich fighting systems. He was seen as Pat's super prospect with Matt Hughes. But Robbie had hit some roadblocks, and they had to cut him. So he went to a lot of lesser promotions, like this one called Icon in Hawaii, where he fought there for a bit. Then he went to Pride when Pride came to Vegas to compete with the UFC, which was a big fail on Pride's end. Then he went to Elite XC and established his dominance there, fighting Scott Smith, fighting Murillo Rua, who was winning belts there. Strikeforce was a bit of an but it can't be denied he had some amazing wars, such as Melvin Manhoef. I think he fought for the belt at one point. But welterweight was his home, and when he came back, he's the definition of potential realized when he finally put the tools together to go on that run. Yes, he didn't fight GSP. I wish we got a GSP fight versus Lawler. I see GSP still winning that fight, but Lawler would have made it like a bloodbath. We would have seen George get bloody. That's how I look at it. Robbie's war to win that belt versus Hendricks in December 6, 2014 is one of the fights that gives me goosebumps, because you look at the end, right when the bell rings, you see Robbie with that death stare he gives his opponents when the eyes roll back like a great white shark. And he's still going at Johnny, and Johnny's like, "What the fuck did I just wake up?" And that's Robbie. He didn't say much, but when he was on his game, you looked more at what his work acumen was than his talking.
For sure. And another great thing to see in Robbie Lawler was just how much he was enjoying himself throughout all of the violence in the fights. That was absolutely the most mesmerizing thing about it, was just how turned on Robbie Lawler was to fucking beating the shit out of these guys.
Robbie Lawler was, yeah, exactly. Turned on is the right word to say, I guess. It's like he embraced the war, you know what I mean? And you knew that you're going in there, you're gonna have a war, kind of like you would have with like Leonard Garcia or fucking Diego Sanchez, or you know that when you get in there, you're gonna have a fucking war, and that's what Robbie Lawler was. And that fight against Rory, the stare down after the 4th round was like something of like, it comes out of a fucking movie, you know, and it shows how tough Robbie Lawler was. His lip split open, you know what I mean? He had crazy fights. We could talk about the Diaz fight. That was a sick fight in general, even though he lost. But yeah, so he's another guy who's like a legend of the sport, where you look at it, you're like, fuck, this guy's been fighting for that long. People don't realize that he was fighting at like as a pro and destroying everybody at the age of like 19 years old, you know, and that's what Robbie Lawler was. Robbie Lawler was just a pure brawler that knew how to put it together, and learned through, like we mentioned before, the Miletich. He learned under guys like Matt Hughes, and he put it all together, but he still kept his brawler status, and he would just destroy guys anytime they try to step to him. You saw, I mean, the last few fights, we could look at the Ben Askren fight, is a little sketchy. He's strung together a bunch of victories until he lost the belt to Woodley, and it was too bad, because I was hoping that he would be able to come back and maybe get another title shot, and it didn't really work out for him. But we know what Robbie Lawler can do, and I think he's just old age is getting to him, and he can't take a punch like he used to. That
style catches up with you, that brawling and that gun and brawl style, and Robbie never became a tactician like GSP does, or the other fighters in welterweight. He's an old man. He's basically the elder statesman in a young man's division.
Very true.
And it would have been nice after he beat Cowboy in that close decision at UFC 214 that Adam was at my house for, if Adam remembers, if Robbie just said, okay, I'm retired. And that would have been like nice, because it was like he fought one BMF, but then he lost, 3 others after. And I was like, did you really need to like take some of those fights? I think he just should have retired after that.
Yeah, but you know what? To cater to both of your points, that's Robbie Lawler in a nutshell. Is just still going up at bat when you think he's hit enough fucking home runs. Yeah, and another thing too is to cater to your points is that Robbie Lawler didn't actually ever develop into a tactician or a technician. He always had that brawler-esque style. He just had a wealth of experience and was able to manage it a lot better in the octagon against maybe a newer evolution of the UFC. And I think that was also something really amazing to see, because even though Johnny Hendricks didn't bring anything new to the table, he still was the young buck at the time, or the chosen one at the time to be knocking at that bell. So ultimately, Matt, I mean, Robbie Lawler is number 3 on my list. For me, I got to go. My favorite fights have to be the one with Johnny Hendricks, 1 and 2, and Robbie Lawler. All of those fights had me out of my seat. I had the pleasure of watching 2 out of 3 of those fights in Thailand, so they hold them near and dear to my heart. But holy shit, man, I was on the edge of my seat for those fights. And just the amount of damage and the sheer pace that Robbie Lawler has put on in the octagon, especially in championship fights, is just absolutely unreal.
Robbie Lawler, living legend. I mean, I think anytime he's on a card, I think everybody's going to start watching that fight, just because he is who he is and what he brings to the table. I mean, like you said, he might not be a tactician, but he is a brawler, and there is a method to that madness, that's for sure. So number 6 on the list is he climbed up pretty quick. He had the same amount of points as Lawler, actually. The reason why I had him ranked below Lawler is because Adam had him number 3, so I took the highest ranking total, and that's why I had Lawler at number 5, and this fighter at number 6. We have him at the Nigerian Nightmare, Kamaru Usman. He's coming in at number 6 with 16 points. I had him at 6th. Andy had him at 5th. Adam had him at 6th. So it was a little bit of a consensus there on where he stands, which means that if this continues in the next couple of years, we might be talking about him being ahead of GSP.
I doubt that. I doubt that very.
I specifically chose the word might.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just want to chime in. I doubt that. I don't think that Usman will be able to surpass George St. Pierre's stardom, just due to the fact also that Ali Abdelaziz is tainting his professionalism by also using his Twitter account, and George would never conduct himself like that in any means necessary. So I doubt that that'll ever happen. But another thing also is the reason why I put Usman on the lower end of the top 10 is the same reason why I put most of the middleweights, the current middleweights, on the lower end as well, is because their career is not yet to fully have unfolded. So I'm certainly not going to rank Usman higher than that. Listen, so far he's shown pure dominancy in his wrestling, shown a wealth of improvement in the striking game. I definitely see how people could be making some of the comparisons with George St. Pierre. However, on a little bit of a different scale, I wouldn't say he's as cautious as George is. I think that Usman puts himself in a little bit more vulnerable positions than George has in the past. But Kamaru Usman deserves to be on this list just due to the fact of what he's done so far in the UFC. And, listen, I think that had people not got lost in the sauce by Mr. Three-Piece in Minnesota, Jorge Masvidal, just his stardom, I think that most people would have unanimously picked Kamaru Usman.
Andy, before you go, just so I can rattle off his last few fights. So he beat Damian Maia. This is all in order. He beat Damian Maia, Rafael Dos Anjos, Tyron Woodley, Colby Covington, and then Jorge Masvidal, what we saw. Very impressive list, but we've seen better, right? That's why he's kind of like that middle pack, and we've seen him dominate. That's why I had him at number 6. Not necessarily a top 5, but somebody that could get there.
Yeah, I got you on that. I had him at number 6 just because I feel like his career hasn't fully come to a full flourish. Andy, chime in, baby.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. He came in, he's one of the few guys on Tough that, is a wrestler. You know how Dana feels about the wrestlers, unless like they have a personality, he doesn't really like back them. But Kamaru was just a dominant guy overall. I'm not going to deny that. But he was fighting guys in a welterweight division that was kind of rebuilding itself, because when he was coming up, yeah, guys in there like Santiago Ponzinibbio, like who the fuck is that guy? And like he's out of the rankings now, so that just shows you like how weak welterweight was when he was coming up. It was going through like that rebuild phase as all divisions go through. And Kamaru his fight with Covington was fun to watch. It was really a striking match, and surprising no wrestling was even used. But I think Kamaru doesn't click with the fans because he does sound very cringy on the mic and cliche. And then you have
like that whole 30% thing. I was like,
yeah, I only saw 30%.
I'm like, 30% of what? I fell asleep.
We fought Emil Meek, and it was like, that was a boring ass fight because a lot of people were showing up hoping actually that Vitor would fight Uriah Hall. But funny thing is, Uriah Hall passed out on weight cut because he drank the night before. But that's a story for another time. Anyways, point is, like, Usman has like had some blunders on the mic, but when he beat Woodley, like, everyone was happy that Tyrone was taken out, because we could all agree no one liked Tyrone as a champion. That was the dark days of the welterweight division. We'll get to that. But Ali Kamaru shoots himself in the foot, giving Ali control of his social media. Because we know Ali's a very controversial figure. But I have a feeling that Kamaru is going to dominate. And if there's one thing I'd like to see with Kamaru, it would be a super fight cross promotion between him versus Douglas Lima and Bellator.
So the thing, I just want to talk about Ali for a bit. And I listened to the episode, Unanimous Decision with Jeremy Kennedy. And he talked about how Ali's his new manager and how he loves his fighters. And I see that, how all these fighters, how he really fights with them. But he is a little bit of a control freak, and he has way too many fighters under him. I don't know how he's able to manage all these things. Obviously, he probably has a team. But I think that Ali needs to take a step back and realize that he's not the fighter. And I think that if Kamaru Usman realizes that and he just starts being who he is, I feel like when he was on Joe Rogan and every time he's on the mic with Usman, it's like, okay, you're just trying to be something that you might not be. You were in med school before. You weren't like this guy that grew up in the streets, or you weren't. You're not a tough guy. Basically, you're just a very athletic wrestler. That's the basic.
Right. Well, another question that I'll ask you is have you ever heard of Dominance MMA?
No. Well, it sounds familiar, but I can't.
Exactly. Dominance MMA, I believe, is the fucking firm that he works for, that he owns to represent these fighters.
Oh, okay. So it's his company.
Nobody knows the name of his firm. Everybody just knows Ali Abdelaziz. Yeah. So it's kind of that controversial thing where the coach has become bigger than the gym, where the agent is bigger than the actual firm. Yeah. And I think that has tremendous consequences to it. And, we see the same thing in the Kawa brothers. I mean, I don't think people know it as much as first round management as they do as Malky and Abe, but
I don't even know who Abe is.
Abe is, Malky is John Jones, and then Abe is Jorge's guy.
Well, Malky has like a lot of guys.
Yes,
Malky's
of course, and they also
deals more with NFL. But they're shady characters too in their own ways. Like I had when I had Andre Benke on. Like, I mean, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth.
Say it, motherfucker. Say it.
But, like Andre just said, he's like Malky and Abe. He's like, they're guys that, like, they're pretty controversial. He's like, I don't want to say much about them. He's like, because if I give them attention, he's like, they're gonna make something. He's like, I don't want to give them attention, but he said, just so you know, he's like, they're not the nicest guys on the block.
Jeremy said the exact same thing in a different way.
Yeah.
About Ali or the Cowas?
Cowas.
Yeah.
Because he was with them before, right? So it was like, anyway, we can talk. Everything's hearsay, right? It's all, we can put words in people's mouths, but it's just that for let's get back to Usman. Usman he's such a dominant fighter and what he can do, and I feel like he could be a legend and he could be considered one of the best. Sometimes he doesn't even have to be an actually better fighter than GSP for some people to say that he's the best. He just needs to take control of his own Twitter account, 1, and 2, stop being so cringy. John Jones learned it after his 3rd DUI. Just be who you are. John Jones, I became a bigger fan of John Jones after all his stupidities because he actually embraced who he was. He's not this religious.
I'm a good Christian guy.
tattoo, all that stuff. Like, you're a fucking asshole, and we see it. I saw it from the beginning. I mean, the guy's a great fighter. Never take anything away from him, but I saw it from the beginning. Usman is a clean-cut guy that's trying to be this badass. It just doesn't fit in, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And Usman will still have a successful career. To wrap up his point, because I'm not really too high on him anyways, I would say my favorite fight watching him was against Colby Covington.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with Adam there. The T Woodley fight was a crouch. It was a crouch. Wow, the wording is not there for me tonight. It was a crotch sniffing contest in the Woodley fight.
So we'll get into it then. So we'll get into number 7 on our list, who lost his belt to number 6 on our list, and that's Tyron Woodley with 15 points. I had him at number 8. Andy had him at number 3. Adam, you had him at number 7. Since Andy had him ranked so high, I'll let you go talk. I'll talk to us about Tyron Woodley and the greatness that he was.
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
All right. So I put him at number 3, and when I was doing it with like this look on my face. I was like, ugh. It's like T Wood. It's like, ugh. But he has dominated. And let's be honest, let's look at it this way. Tyrone, when he came on and knocked out Robbie Lawler, everyone was like, holy fuck, we got a new striker that's going to put people to sleep in the division. And as a contender, he was like pretty cool. Like, as a contender coming up, he wasn't like entitled. Like, he's like, I'm going to get the belt when I'm ready. And, when they give it to me. But then when he became champion, he started making demands that were bigger than that were too. He was making too big demands for his ego. So we had the Wonder Boy fight, the first one, and very controversial fight because it was a draw. But some could even say that Steven didn't just enough to eke out the victory in that fight. So then we had to have the second Woodley and Thompson fight, and it was very boring. All his title defenses were extremely boring when he did not even use his like knockout power that that the UFC wanted to get behind. The second Wonder Boy fight, he used a very safe approach to fight Steven, but that's the fight you need to beat a guy, a striking specialist like Wonder Boy. Then you had the Damian Maia fight, and Adam can remember I fell asleep in that co-main event because it was fucking boring. So boring, I felt like I was on my phone at one point, then sleeping, waiting for DC Jones 2 to start. And every time every time someone gets on Tyrone, he plays the race card, and it becomes annoying to play after because we don't like it's people don't like you not because of your color. They don't like you because you're boring and you're a whiner and you whine about everything. Oh, I don't have a thumb. It's like Dana said. Connor said, I don't need a thumb. I just need the rest of my 4 fingers to fight. And every time we wanted the Colby Tyrone fight, it's like Tyrone had an excuse, Colby had an excuse, but more Tyrone had an excuse. And then after that, when Usman beat him, everyone was like, finally, this guy's reign is over. So, yeah, look, I hated putting him at number 3. Fuck Tyrone Woodley. You're still a bitch, Tyrone. And, you're the worst champion in welterweight history.
So I have to interrupt you guys and let you guys know that as we're doing this episode, my girlfriend's watching Friends in the background. And it's the episode where John Favreau, who plays Pete Becker, Monica's love interest, he fights in the UFC. And he's fighting against Tank Abbott right now. And it's not
Tank Abbott. Oh, man.
We got well for Pete Becker.
Wow.
And Bruce Buffer's announcing, there's John McCarthy. He's the ref. This is classic, man. This is probably
the
1996.
Yeah, Tank Abbott was the bad boy of the UFC then.
And he's not even wearing gloves. There you go. And he just takes him down and throws him out of the octagon. So, Adam, we'll talk. Well, you go. We talk about Woodley, and I'll jump in after.
Well, look, my biggest problem with Woodley is that he kind of set the stage for himself after boasting a win over Carlos Condit when he blew out his ACL, thinking that his leg kick was actually the thing that blew out Condit's knee, but it was actually just a faulty movement by Condit. So he had already set the stage from a very long time ago for fans to think that he was a bit of a putz. Putz, which is, essentially what kind of happened throughout the career. I mean, he adopted a pretty boring style in all of his fights, except for his 2 fights that he won by finish versus Darren Till and Robbie Lawler, which was heartbreaking. I mean, look, Robbie Lawler, the reason why I saw that Woodley was going to be successful against Lawler was that he had Lawler backing up and had Lawler tentative. Every time you see Woodley on the back foot, you can guarantee it's going to be a long night for him. Rory McDonald had already set that stage. And look, the reason why I have Woodley so low, but on the list still, is just still due to the fact that he still did win a lot of those big fights, whether they were boring or not. But fact of the matter is that Woodley is not able to get the fans behind him. You know, and I think that how Woodley portrays himself in the media versus how he actually lives his life in his personal time, I think are two different things. And I actually think that fans could genuinely see through that.
I mean, yeah, people were, I was able to see right through, and it was so annoying. Like you said, Andy, it was always like, the UFC's racist.
You got my back, I got your back.
The UFC's racist or whatever it is, you know, and it was just tiring to hear. It's like, I say this all the time. The guy fights like he has a 3-round lead. You know, he backs up against the cage just like he has no game plan. All he knows how to do is the same thing. People figured him out in the first Wonderboy fight. The first Wonderboy fight, I mean, I had a Wonderboy, but I can understand why they gave the decision that way. It was a unanimous draw or whatever it was, right? And I understand why they made the decision that way, but I gave it to Wonderboy. And then when they fought again, I was hoping for something different. And Woodley should have, like you said, Andy, maybe it was the perfect fight that he fought that way. But to me, it was an opportunity for him to smack around Wonderboy. And he fights kind of very tentatively, and that's why people never really got on board with him. Not only that, it was that he always played the victim card. It was always somebody else's problem. It was always somebody else's fault. It was never him, and I think that's why, to me, he fell to number 8 on my list. Because if it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for him being, if he was 35% more exciting, or he had a couple more finishes, all we saw was the choke of Darren Till. Darren Till was not ready for a championship fight back then, and we saw him knock out Lawler, and Lawler's chin's been gone for a long time. So it's like, actually, that was probably the fight that took away Lawler's chin.
Yep.
Probably. Yeah, I definitely agree. And then you had like Rashad Evans, who came out and said to him, like when Tyron was having verbal spats with Dana, he's like, listen, he's like, you're playing a dangerous game, young man. He's like, even though you're the champion, he's like, the company is always going to have the final say in the last lap in the end. Like, and because Rashad, he said, he's like, I used to be like Tyrone, and then I learned to keep in line and toe the company line, because he's like, I was making a fool of myself.
Always playing the victim. And just to round that up, I mean, one of the sad parts is about Tyron Woodley is just the fact that he always just had to justify all of his performances, just due to the fact that they were pretty boring and really slow. And another thing too is that he always got a lot of flack for being tentative and being patient, just due to the fact that he was so explosive and had so much potential at just starching people at any moment. So it just sucked that when he tried to take his time, fans would shit on him. But like you said, Terry, there's a difference between taking your time and acting like you have a 3-4 round lead.
That's exactly it. And I think that's what he does. And we saw that in his last fight against, who did he fight last recently?
Gilbert Burns, he fought.
Gilbert Burns, yeah, exactly. It was Gilbert Burns' best fight he's ever going to fight in his career. And Woodley made him look a lot better than he actually is, you know. And it's unfortunate that we're talking about him being in the top 10 and we're kind of hating on him. But realistically, is that we're disappointed because the talent level of what he had. He's such a good wrestler, knockout power. Jiu-jitsu was pretty good, you know what I mean? So I think we're hating on him because we expected him to be a little bit higher on our rankings, because he was such a good fighter and he was so dominant for such a long fucking time, you know?
Yeah, and then when he lost, everyone was like, finally, you know, we don't have to, the Woodley era is gone. But then now we have the Usman era, and they're like, fuck, it's like it's another cringy.
Then it's going to be the freaking Hazmat Chimaev era. It's going to be the same thing. It's like welterweights are made to be boring or something.
I don't know.
We'll go to number 7. So I had an issue with number 7. The reason why I had an issue with number 7, not the fighter itself. So what I wanted to do was, if 2 people didn't vote for this person in their top 10, I took him out. And that's what happened here. BJ Penn is technically number 7 on our list because I had him ranked number 3. And so I'm taking him off the list because I was the only one that nominated him. So what that does is it bumps Carlos Condit up to number 7 with 6 points. I had him at number 9. Actually, all 3 of us had him at number 9. And I'll start. I think Carlos Condit was one of my favorite fighters. I know he's one of my favorite fighters of all time. Loved watching him fight. Always brought it. I think that all those brawls really caught up to him really quickly. And he was, even though he was never the actual champion, I think seeing him with that belt when he won the interim belt against Nick Diaz, even though, you know, a lot of people gave it to Diaz, I think it was actually refreshing to see Carlos Condit because everybody liked him, everybody respected him. He was such a good fighter, and he still is a good fighter. And I wanted to see a lot more out of him. And I was actually kind of hoping he would beat GSP. If it was going to be anybody to beat GSP, it would have been Carlos Condit because what's his nickname? The Natural Born Killer? Was that his nickname?
Yep. Natural Born Killer, yeah.
Natural Born Killer. And so I like Carlos Condit a lot, and I think that fight against GSP when he kneed him and when he clipped him on the forehead and you just saw the GSP's forehead growing as he was falling down to the ground. So it was like Carlos Condit had that where he had that window, and if he capitalized in that window, we would be talking about him a lot higher on this list.
Yeah.
Look, man, I gotta give it to Carlos Condit. I mean, he had one of the most impressive. He had one of the most impressive runs in the UFC. He had some of the most exciting and top performances in the UFC. Another guy like a Robbie Lawler or like a Nick Diaz more like a Nick Diaz in the sense that had the top fights, had the exciting fights and the great matchups, but the career didn't pan out to where he ultimately wanted it to be. Carlos Condit will never settle for just being the interim champ. I think that he truly wanted to, obviously become the champ against GSP at UFC 154. So, the thing is with Carlos Condit, as much as he has had all of the fight of the nights, etc., that comes with a fucking dangerous price, and that's fucking taking a lot of shots. And I think that that's essentially, like you guys said, kind of what cut Carlos Condit's career short. Because yes, he has been in all of these massacres, but he's also been a little bit on the receiving end of them.
Yeah, that style, as I said, it's a typical, like I'll say it again, it catches up with you. Carlos did have a bit more of a tactic to his game, being under Greg Jackson and Mike Winklejohn. However, just if you look at it, the damage he's taken has caught up with him. Like, he fought a Cowboy Oliveira on short notice, which he should have won that fight, but then Cowboy just took him out, and he's been on the receiving end of a lot of losses
Injuries
now, and
too.
Injuries but he came from a good camp. That's the one thing we can never deny.
He came from a good camp, but another thing too is that as much as Carlos Condit has had his heart broken, he has broken a lot of fucking hearts in the UFC.
Exactly.
Let's think about it now. Dan Hardy, he's broken Dan Hardy's heart. He's broken Rory McDonald's heart.
Diaz.
He's broken Nick Diaz's heart. He starts GSP with that third or fourth round head kick. Listen, man, Carlos Condit has broken as many hearts as he's gotten broken.
The only thing with Carlos Condit is if I'm looking at, like we said, we talk about his last few fights. I'm just pulling it up now. Lost to Chiesa, lost to Cowboy Oliveira, lost to Magny, lost to Maia, lost to Lawler. Before that, he beat Thiago Alves, was on a kind of like a comeback. Lost to Woodley, beat Martin Kampman, lost to Hendricks, lost to GSP, and then before that he actually had a sick run. Ellenberger, McDonald, Dan Hardy, Don Young Kim, and Nick Diaz. Those are 5 wins in a row. So I mean, it's just you kind of see where he started faltering, and it was after he basically got after he lost the belt, after he lost his opportunity for the belt, he kind of started falling off from there. But it's too bad because I'm a huge fan of Condit. Always was, always will be.
Well spoken too. He's not like He's very well spoken.
Was Dad's like a politician or something? Or
yeah, he came from a very good background. Like, he's a hunter. He has like that movement coach too. He was on Joe Rogan I think once or twice, and he spoke about his fighting very it was like a professor. Like when you hear him talk.
And he's another guy too that you don't realize how long he's been around. I mean, I'm looking at his old fights, and I remember this fight, man. And when he fought against Frank Trigg, man, it's like. I'm going back, and he's fought like some pretty good fighters back in the day. This is like 15 years ago. And Carlos Condit, man, you can't sleep on that guy. That guy was always game, always ready to fight, and he always brought it. There was no doubt that the Natural Born Killer was going to have that belt around his waist at some point. It just sucks that he couldn't keep it.
Yeah, man, Carlos Condit is an absolute fucking killer. It kind of sucks to see how his career has panned out a little bit. As of lately, I don't believe that he will be back in the octagon. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think he's competing just jiu-jitsu now.
Okay, well, you know what? I think that's awesome. And like I said, man, Carlos Condit has been in some of the best fights that we've seen, like a Robbie Lawler. and he absolutely deserves to fucking be on this list. And he's one of the guys that I really wish got the belt around his waist. He's probably the only guy, besides maybe one or two other people we'll see, that is on this list without the belt.
I think he's right now. He's the only one that hasn't got the belt on this list so far.
No, Nick Diaz.
Nick Diaz is the only one. Yeah. Well, technically, Condit had the interim belt, so I mean, I'll give him half respect on that one. But it should have been Nick Diaz with that half respect. You know what I mean? So then that's how it goes. So that was number 8. We're going down to number 9. Number 9 was a champion. Only after GSP retired. I had him at I didn't have him on my list. Andy had him at number 8, and Adam had him at number 8. This is Johnny Hendricks, and Johnny Hendricks is very interesting to me because I respected him as a fighter. I thought he was great. I just thought that he was another guy where he kind of like expected a lot of things, and he had a short window and he realized it that he tried to take advantage of, and it just didn't work. And I feel like, I mean, not to accuse him of anything, but I feel like once USADA came in, we saw pudgy Hendricks. And I think that Hendricks, after USADA, was a very different fighter. And hadn't USADA come into the UFC, I think we would have seen Hendricks come back and be a champion again.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And one of the things that Hendricks tried to pose was that he like reinvented the wheel by working with this new set of this fucking team with strength and conditioning coaches and his kickboxing coaches, etc. Adrian Ramirez. And like, it's like, dude, everybody has been doing this style of training. So it's kind of like what has actually been different. And that is what has raised eyebrows. Has Johnny Hendricks done performance enhancing drugs before? Look, we can't prove that. The reason why I have Hendricks on the list is because of the performance against George St. Pierre, because of, you know, the performances against Robbie Lawler, because of the performances against Carlos Condit. Look, he deserves to be on there just like anybody else. The reason why I also have him on the list is because I truly believe that, you know, during that GSP era of winning the belt, we saw a lot of fucking fights where it was almost like a constant welterweight tournament, and Johnny Hendricks played a big part in that. And what is this list without another guy who was part of that tournament in Johnny Hendricks? So that's also why I feel that he deserves to be on this list.
Remember though that tournament, like you said, that at that time the welterweight division was so fucking stacked. There was the worst out of the top 8, let's say, was Magny, and Magny had won like 9 fights in a row at that point, all in the same year. And then you had Damian Maia, you had Martin Kampman, you had a GSP, obviously, Hendricks, Condit, Diaz, Lawler, McDonald. I mean, the whole weight class at that time was all these guys at their peak, and for Hendricks to come out on top at that point is big respect to that guy.
Yeah, I definitely would have to agree there, but welterweight was like the murderer's row. It was the premier division of mixed martial arts. Like that's what you were paying the pay-per-view for.
Yeah.
Although Hendricks also expected too much, and when you heard him on the mic talk like this, and he couldn't get behind that, it's like, I know I'm a champion, George. We'll settle it right here. It sounds like a mix of like Steve-O and like that annoying Southerner put together, and you're like who the? They're like, what the fuck is this shit? What's he talking like that? And then, like, you couldn't get behind him. He always felt entitled. Yeah, I mean, GSP was a very close war. I put him on that list, too, because he did give George a very, very tough fight. And it can't be denied. He also beat Robbie in a very close fight and was arguably one of the fights of the year.
Yeah. Borderline beat GSP. I might watch that fight 3 times. I still gave it to GSP, but I might have a bias there because I really feel like Hendricks did a lot of damage for 3 rounds at least, and it was a split decision for sure, but I could see Hendricks winning that fight by decision.
By the way, I was looking at your, you said Neil Magny. I just pulled up his stats. He had a 5-fight win streak in that year with that. Hendricks was a champion. So yeah, like welterweight when GSP left, but I always like to say, when GSP vacated the belt the first time, all of MMA was in a flux. Like I consider 2014 a big down year for MMA because a big void was left, and welterweight was kind of reeling itself out. So I think welterweight's been rebuilding itself for about 4.5 to 5 years most.
It's been since GSP left. I mean, now I think it's Woodley didn't really bring it back to what it was. I feel like Usman right now, there's a lot of guys that can contend. I mean, we can talk about Colby again. We can talk about Masvidal, even Nate Diaz, Connor. I mean, the welterweight division is pretty stacked if you think about it. On the potential fights, it could not necessarily guys that fight in that weight class all the time, like Connor and Nate Diaz example,
or Cowboy,
or even Cowboy. But if you look at it, if you look at guys' potential to have like a 8-man tournament, let's say, it's pretty fucking stacked. And back then, Hendricks coming out of that was impressive.
Yeah, there was him. There was Martin Kampman, Condit, Nick Diaz.
Gunnar Nelson was making it up, like he was coming up at that point, and he was like, everybody's like, this guy's the best jiu-jitsu guy in the world, you know. And
easily one of the biggest disappointments in the UFC.
I agree, man. I was a huge Gunnar Nelson guy.
Easily one of the most frustrating guys. Aside from him, is probably somebody we're going to talk about next, is Rory McDonald, another fucking aggravating guy to watch.
So I guess we'll get right into it. Number 10 is our the boy from Kelowna. Is he Kelowna? I think it's Kelowna.
Yeah, from BC.
Kelowna, BC, living out of Montreal, fighting out of Montreal, is Rory McDonald right now with the PFL, and
yep.
Roy McDonald, man, the fight against, I think we'll talk about our favorite fights. All of us are going to say Robbie Lawler. Roy McDonald was the bridesmaid, you know what I mean? That he was always going to be right behind GSP, under GSP's shadow. And as soon as GSP left, everybody's like, okay, now we're going to see real Rory McDonald. And he had that title shot against Robbie Lawler, and it was like, fuck, is he ever going to win, you know? And I think we all have the utmost respect for Rory McDonald and what he's done and what he's continued to doing. And I just think that he's one of the guys that just didn't pan out for some reason, and it's very frustrating to me. I think, and you and I had him at number 10, and Andy, you didn't have him on your list because you had Wonder Boy on your list.
Yeah,
Look, you go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, so the reason why is because Rory was, I think the UFC, when GSP left, there were two guys that the UFC really wanted to groom to be Canada's MMA successor. They were Rory McDonald and Ali Aubin-Mercier coming out of Quebec.
Yeah.
And they put a lot of pressure on that. You have to fill a huge gap.
The Canadian Gangster, you got to say his government name, the Canadian Gangster.
The Canadian Gangster, yeah. The Canadian Gangster, but we'll get into that for the lightweight if you want to have a lightweight mashup. Anyway,
I don't think he's anywhere close on that list. And I know Ali, he's not anywhere close on that top 10 of all time lightweight list.
But anyways, yeah, with Rory, it's like he left, like with Rory, they said, yeah, he's supposed to be the future of welterweight after GSP leaves for Canada. But he's very to himself, very introverted, kind of is he on the spectrum maybe? Because he wasn't charismatic, very robotic like this. I don't really like fighting, but it's Jesus Christ is my savior. And that's what happened when he became a born again Christian. They I think what the UFC does when they kind of want to get rid of a fighter, they'll give him that tough fight, a boring fight, the Wonder Boy fight he had where he was very tentative and Wonder Boy just won on point. And, he had great success in Bellator fighting Douglas Lima, but then he had that fight versus Mousasi, which was a dangerous fight, which he took with a lot of distractions. And then he also had the fight versus Neiman where he's like, oh yeah, I'm back. Then he fought John Fitch. He said, I don't really like fighting. Then he fought Lima again, and Bellator just never really got behind him after he won the belt.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, I think that Bellator actually never got behind him after he lost the belt. After he got beaten up by Gegard Mousasi, I just didn't think that he got the push that he wanted and got the frequency of fights that he wanted. Rory McDonald was definitely set to be the next golden boy out of Montreal. I think the biggest thing with Rory was, just the fact that he had to fucking fight. He had to fight some tough competition. And in a way, yes, he fought very, very similar competition as Georges St. Pierre, but he fought them completely differently. And I think that was also one of the reasons why we didn't see similar results is Rory wasn't able to utilize his wrestling as much as George was. But also another thing too is that Rory was so calculated and so precise and so into the moment against most of his opponents that, even though you see that Rory took a lot of damage, he was very cautious in all of his fights due to the fact of just knowing what his opponent was capable of doing to him on the receiving end. And that also brought in a lot of frustration because we know how talented Rory is. But I got to have him on the list because when Rory is on, like we saw against Tyron Woodley, you know, like we saw against even what we saw against Robbie Lawler when he had lost to him, he was on that night, man. Like when Rory McDonald is on, he is one of the #1 fighters in the world.
That was the first fight after that 4th round when they gave each other that staring contest, right?
That's the second fight.
That was the second. So he won.
Yeah.
Didn't he get TKO'd in the second fight?
Yeah, and in the first fight he got lost like a split decision.
It was a split decision. So the stare down was after the second fight.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
The stare down was after the second fight. And, you know, look, man, like, again, Rory McDonald, when he fought Tarek Saffiedine, like, dude, that was a fucking killer performance. So, like we saw, when Rory McDonald is on, he was absolutely on, and it just sucked to see when he was losing. It not only was his competition beating him, but it almost looked as if he was beating himself.
I actually like Tarek Saffiedine in that fight. I was like, fuck, if anybody can come out with a win, it might be a kickboxer. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
Saffiedine
Tarek was a high-level guy.
Yeah.
I was like, whatever happened to Tarek? Like, I think they cut him, and now he's like, he hasn't been heard from since. He like maybe retired
maybe
or
he went back to kickboxing. I don't know.
No, like not even. Like I tried looking up. It's like the last news of the report was like from 2019 in January.
So that's it for the top 10 honorable mentions. I guess we have Wonder Boy. I mean, to me, Wonder Boy is. It's actually, I'm surprised when I made my list. I don't want to go and correct it after, but I'm surprised I didn't have Wonder Boy on my list because I'm such a fan, you know. And
yeah,
I don't have Wonder Boy on the list just due to the fact that he hasn't quite, you know, done it all yet. Yeah. I think that there is potential he could fucking be on the top 10 list after his next fight. So
if he had won against Woodley, I think we're having a completely different conversation here.
Yeah.
And I think that he might have strung in a few victories there because the landscape of the welterweight division at that point wasn't great. And I think that he could have actually come up with maybe 3 or 4 title defenses until somebody might have knocked him off. And Wonder Boy, I think that he's going to be that Donald Cerrone guy or the Uriah Faber who's just never going to win that belt, and he's always going to be right there as like, oh, he could be a good title contender, you know. And it's too bad. Another honorable mention, I mentioned it before, is for me is BJ Penn. I don't think we can ignore what he's done in the welterweight division, being a champ, the first technically 2-division champ, obviously, not simultaneously. He's BJ Penn. I mean, I always remember licking the gloves, you know. It's like licking the blood off the gloves, and it's like he's just a fucking brawler, man. And his image gets kind of tarnished now because of what's happened with TMZ, and he's getting caught all the time in bar fights.
Well, there's also so many losses on his fucking record.
His last 8 fights or something, 8 or 9 fights, he has lost.
UFC record, yeah. And then the UFC was like, yeah, we're cutting you, buddy.
I mean, I guess after 8 fights, they took advantage of him for that long. They shouldn't have let him fight anyway. You know what I mean? Like the guy you can tell the guy's not well, and he's not well enough to fight anymore. And it kind of ruined, and that's what sucks about a lot of these fighters, and it happens a lot more than it doesn't, is that their image gets tarnished by them not retiring when they should. Chuck Liddell's another example. Tito Ortiz is another example. Before Adam, you came on the call, Andy and I were talking about Tito Ortiz and how he was the reason why I started watching the UFC, and he's kind of, people look at him now, he's like, oh, that guy's fucking annoying. But Tito Ortiz was a fucking legend on the mic back in the day.
Yeah, bro. Guaranteed he was.
When he was talking shit to Ken Shamrock.
No, that was the best. He's like, you see this? This is the Bellagio. Up here's my room. Up here's the penthouse. This is where I'm gonna be after I kick Ken Shamrock's ass. His wife will be up there too with me, probably.
And then Ken Shamrock kicks the chair up and it goes like fucking 10 feet.
And he starts laughing, Tito Ortiz. Yeah, but you know what? I would say that certain UFC fighters talking trash in hindsight has looked a little bit cringy, but in the moment we enjoyed it.
Of course.
So that you know, kind of tends to happen. One thing that I wanted to know is that for 7, 8, 9, 10, what were your favorite fights quickly?
Oh, it's true. We didn't really do that, eh? I mean, so we'll go Condit, Hendricks, Rory. Condit for me, fuck, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. I think I'm gonna have to. I don't know. Give me a second. I'll think. You guys go.
Condit, I'll have to say it would have to be his fight versus Lawler. Yeah, he lost, but it was such a close fight. Like anyone could have won that fight.
Yeah.
This is a tough one for me also, but look, if I'm going to have to go with Carlos Condit, man, I think my favorite fight actually against him had to be the one against fucking Dan Hardy, just due to the fact that he fucking went out. He starched this guy, I believe, in England in 30 seconds, like turned around, shrugged his shoulders, like, this guy's a fucking bum. I belong here. Forget about all of you guys. And like, I'm here to stay. Now, another fight that you obviously can't take away is actually Carlos Condit versus Jake Ellenberger. That was a fucking sick fight, which I think ended up in a draw, or I think Ellenberger was up in that fight, and then Carlos Condit ended up pulling out the win. Regardless, Condit has been in wars, and I certainly wouldn't pick the one against Rory McDonald just because he fought a younger Rory.
I was gonna say Rory McDonald just because of who he was at the time. I mean, he was an up-and-coming guy. That Jake Ellenberger fight, you're right, absolutely. I think I would give it to him. It was a split decision, but it was an awesome, it was an amazing performance by Condit. I'm gonna say the Rory McDonald fight just because it was, he's able to finish a guy that had so much hype and so much talent, and it was like, listen, this is my fucking house. You're visiting here for a couple years until I tell you you're allowed. So Hendricks, what about Hendricks? Who's your favorite fight for Hendricks?
I liked when he knocked out Fitch. That was a good one because Fitch was like, because as I said, the UFC kind of has a way when they want to cut the meat, they want to cut the fat off their roster. No disrespect to Fitch, who was like an awesome competitor. They wanted to get rid of that only grinded out style, wrestle, grapple, and Hendricks like kind of did the promotion a favor.
I'm trying to remember a few of his fights actually. Johnny Hendricks, unless you tell me a fight, I wouldn't be able to remember.
I'm going to have to take Robbie Lawler versus Johnny Hendricks at UFC 171. I don't really care that Hendricks won that fight, but I got to choose that one because he won it, and it was a fucking just completely exciting fight. Another one that I will say is that I will appreciate the Martin Kampman KO. That was fucking awesome with the overhand left. That was dope.
Yeah, Caplan, man, people forget about him as a gatekeeper.
Yeah,
Martin
Kampman had A1 fucking K1 style with a little bit of Muay Thai twist on it, and he's from Denmark.
Didn't GSP shut that down real quick? Or I don't think they ever fought for the belt. I don't think he ever fought for the belt, actually. It's a good question.
No, Kampman never fought for the belt.
But he was kind of like always like two wins, and then he would lose, and he'd get back down the rankings. Back then when rankings actually meant something.
Yep.
And number 10, we'll go, we said Rory already, but my favorite fight against Rory was his TKO loss to Robbie Lawler. I mean.
Oof. You know what? My favorite would have to be my favorite win would have to be the one over Tarek Saffiedine. I thought that KO was fucking completely clutch. So I got to go with that one. But obviously, you can't not pick Robbie Lawler versus Rory McDonald too.
Actually, sorry, Andy, I'll cut you off. But actually, I liked that Rory McDonald went to Bellator and he was able to beat Douglas Lima. He was able to beat Naaman Gracie. He's able to show everybody that, listen, you guys are good. He's like, but there's another level to this fucking game. You know what I mean?
You see, the problem with me picking his Bellator fights is that, it's just like I just haven't had the exposure to it, unfortunately, as much. I've seen, bits and pieces of Rory's Bellator career, but I can't say that I've watched it as thoroughly as I have in his UFC career.
Andy, what's your favorite Rory fight?
Definitely the first fight versus Douglas Lima, because a lot of strategy used in that fight. He really injured his leg and was able to beat Lima, who at the time, who to this day is considered one of the best welterweights to never fight in the UFC, but arguably one of the best welterweights on the planet.
He's a good fighter.
He's gonna fight Mousasi soon. Now I'm excited for that fight. I know it's a
we
game.
Know you're excited. We know you're excited.
But no, it's like I think Douglas Lima. Like I wish I put him on the list, but because no one really follows Bellator. That's why it's like I'm not gonna wake up and say, "Hey guys, let's do a fight companion of Bellator."
I'd be down. I'm if next time Mousasi fights, I'm gonna make sure to watch it and I'm gonna live tweet you the entire fight. Just be like, oh, I don't know about that overhand right. It didn't look too good, or I don't know, he looks a little sluggish. Probably gonna get unfollowed.
Andy King Mousasi Michael.
Gotta support my Persian boy, man. But yeah, man, this is like next up is light heavyweights. That's gonna be, it's gonna be a tough one because it's like it's not
tough because it's like the original division,
Yeah, and it's like you gotta look at the OGs. Like we grew up on Chuck Liddell and Tito, but like the generation, like if you're born after like 94 or 95, like they grew up on John Jones and maybe Rashad Evans or Shogun, but or Machida.
Oh, Rashad.
Yeah, and Rampage.
You'd be surprised at where I have Rashad on my light heavyweight list.
Rampage only had one good defense, and then he lost to Forrest Griffin, and then Rampage
but you can't take away what Rampage did in Pride.
Yeah, he didn't win the belt in Pro. No, he did win the belt, I think, right?
Yeah, he was a champion for a while. Then he lost to Vanderlei.
Yes, he did. He lost to Vanderlei 3 times by tie clinch.
Because Vanderlei was back then was the legit axe murderer. Good stuff, boys. I had fun as usual. The intro wasn't recording on my mic; it was recording on my laptop. So whatever. I think either way, I think it picked it up. I don't think
that's karma. That's karma. The internet will not hear you trying to butcher and make fun of the unanimous decisions. Fucking introduction. That's karma.
I'm just giving. I'm paying you respect. I love the intro. Yeah. It's crack-a-lackin'. I love that. It's the best. I like it. I'm not making fun. So again, I appreciate you guys coming on. Like you said, Andy, we're gonna do the light heavyweight. I'm gonna post this on Hot Sauce Sports. The next one's gonna be on Beyond the Fight, and we'll do the rotation that way. Adam, did you post the middleweights yet?
No, I didn't post the middleweights. I'm going to be posting that tomorrow, but by the time we post this one, tomorrow won't make sense to our viewers. So for us, I'm going to post it tomorrow.
August 5th.
And that's it for me. You can find me at Adam Caplan 13 on Instagram, at Adam Caplan 13 on Twitter, or on Instagram at the Unanimous Decision MTL. We're going to be dropping, just as much content as we usually have been. Appreciate being on the show, Terry. It's always a fucking ball. And if you guys haven't heard Andy's latest podcast with Nick DeSantis and Sandro Furr on Beyond the Fight, it was a good listen. And Andy made this guy fucking work for it. He made him work for it. He asked him a lot of questions from all over the realm. And, even the everyday common questions just to make the kid feel comfortable. But he certainly made him work for it and didn't let Andy just do the majority of the talking and really let this kid promote himself and his skills. So big ups to my boy Andy Musasi.
Thanks. Yeah, no, honestly, guys, that's you can catch me at Beyond the Fight Pod. Also, Drew K 88. And if you ever if you're amateur or pro, you want to connect, we'll make something happen. However, I'm focusing more on the amateur side, but I'll still make time for the pros. But amateur is the route I'm going for the rest of 2020, most likely.
You can find me at just Hot Sauce Sports everywhere. Terry Tam on Twitter. We're dropping content all the time. This week we have a second round pick by the Alouettes coming on this week. So keeping up with that theme with all sports all the time. Again, guys, thanks again. We'll see you soon. Next up is light heavyweight on the championship rounds. Peace.
Peace.